Hello, it's Jeremy here. I'll be talking about the webhook-based telemetry coming into AireOS 8.7. So the webhook client runs within the WLC and exposes information over a HTTPS connection to an external third-party server. This information is called a payload, and each payload contains a unique set of information that is defined via Yang models. These payloads contain operational data about the status of the WLC, including access point, client, and system-level information. I'll discuss the HTTPS and DNS considerations, as well as the payloads and configuration in the next couple of slides. So Webhook is different from traditional API. Webhook is what's called a pub submodel, where we subscribe to the topic of our interest, and the data will be published periodically or on event changes. We no longer need to poll the WLC. Instead, the data is pushed out to us at predefined intervals. Right now, that's every 30 seconds. It can also be fixed at every 5-minute intervals as well. So what the webhook allows us to do is get access to data about what's happening within the WLC. The data shown here isn't very meaningful until we slice and dice or process it to get the bits that are interesting for us. For example, we can take the raw data and draw a line chart showing the number of DHCP acknowledgements that the WLC processes, or take a look at the rogue SSIDs that are being detected, as shown in the two examples on the right. As there are several different data sets that are available, we can choose to subscribe to some or all of them and build visualizations and insights that are interesting to us. So these are the subscriptions or the topics that we can choose from. There are 7 in total, and we can subscribe to any one of them, or any multiple of them, or all of them. The most common payloads are the access point, client, system, and network. They provide the bulk of the interesting data that we can build visualizations with. If we're looking at rogues or interference, we can enable these 2 topics, as well as the map server topic is for fabric-enabled wireless. It doesn't have anything, any details of location, it doesn't have any capabilities of like CMX or MSE. But there are options for that as well. So if we take a look at what's available from the CMX today, there are some new status conditions that have been posted, as well as some filters that you can do directly within the CMX 10.4 UI. There's documentation for all of the APIs within CMX as well, and that's all posted onto Swagger. There's also an example of the JSON payload here, so if you do want to start working with this data set, this is what's available to you. But moving back to AireOS, these are the 7 topics that we can subscribe to here. There's Yang models that back each of them, and these Yang models are posted on CCO along with the 8.7 code. So when you download the code to upgrade your controller, you can also download the Yang tarball package, and then you can analyze the Yang models if you need to understand all the data sets that are going to be posted. The Yang models are just text, they're key value text. So you can easily read it with a text editor, or you can use some simple Python tools like pyang, for example, to better visualize the models. And that's what I've done here, where we're actually looking at a WLC ops network model here. What we see is the network topic subscription that contains counters and statistics for radius, TACAX, DHCP, and there's even some CDP information in here. With this data, we can build visualizations to see, for example, spikes or dips in the number of radius requests, or we can take a look at the number of DHCP declines that the WLC is processing. So all configuration can be done from the GUI as well as the CLI. So let's just take a look first at the GUI and understand all of the settings here. DX, or data externalization, this is the process that allows the WLC to access information from its internal data stores. It processes it and it makes it available. So DX must be enabled on the CLI, and it does take a reboot, or it does require a reboot to take effect. You can check this with the command is show DX summary, but most controllers already have this enabled by default starting at version 8.5. For the data publishing settings, we can enable or disable differential snapshots. When enabled, the differential snapshot or payload received, it contains only the data that has changed since the previous snapshot or payload. When we set this to disabled, the full payload is sent every time. The URL and auth token must also be set, which specifies where the data is sent to. It should be set to the IP or the DNS name of the third-party server. So in this configuration, we're using Logstash, so we set this to the IP of the Logstash server. Also, the subscription configuration section here details the topics that can be subscribed to. And again, these are going to be backed by those Yang models. We can choose individual topics, or we can enable all of them, and that's what's done here. And then finally, under the data publishing settings, we see the status of the last error and the last success, so that we know if the connection was successful to that third-party server. So the connection between the WLC and the third-party server must be secured with TLS, and the WLC must be able to validate that certificate. So what needs to happen is you need to transfer the certificate authority certificate to the WLC using the transfer download command. And you also need to be sure to set the data type to Webhook CA cert. Regarding DNS, if the connection to the third-party server uses a DNS name instead of an IP address, then we need to make sure that the WLC can resolve that DNS name. And it's done by ensuring that the config network DNS server IP setting is defined so that the WLC can resolve that name to an IP address. So the GUI can be used to configure the webhook, and the CLI can be used here as well. The only difference is that on the GUI, everything's within one page, and on the CLI, there's two different commands. For configuration, everything is within the config telemetry webhook command. And then for the show, or to get the summary, it's a show telemetry webhook summary. We get all the same details as we do in the GUI, and all the same configuration settings are available in both GUI and CLI. In the lab here, we're using the following technology stack to process the webhook data. Kibana is the visualization front end. It queries the Elasticsearch data store. This is where it actually builds the visualizations from. Elasticsearch is our backend data store or database. It holds all the data received from the WLC. And then, of course, Logstash is our data processing engine. So it receives the payloads from the WLC, processes it, slices and dices, and sends it back into Elasticsearch. Looking a little bit closer here into Logstash, doing the data processing. So Logstash is our third-party webhook receiver. It's what actually interacts directly with the WLC. We use the HTTP input, which is a built-in plugin that comes with Logstash. What this module or this plugin does is it processes the data that it receives and builds out individual fields for each JSON element that it receives from the Yang models. Later, we'll use Kibana to create a visualization based off of one of these fields. So here's Kibana, where we've actually, it's the user interface where we can really start to see the data. Here we've created a pie chart against the header XPath keyword field, which gives us a breakdown of the subscription topics that's providing most of the payloads. So what we can see here is that it's cut off, but we can normally see the access points in the client's system and network. Those are the main topics that are the most chatty, that have the most information for us. This is the main Discover view within Kibana. We use this view to look at individual data payloads. As well, it gives us an understanding of when the data started and stopped flowing, as well as the volume of the data. So depending on how big the waterfall is here, defines how much data that we're receiving. So finally, we take multiple visualizations and place them onto a single, what's called a dashboard. And this is the dashboard view here. Here we see a list of the pod WLCs, access points, and the clients. And then at the bottom, we have just a couple of line charts that show us the WLC IP and host name over time with the number of payloads that received. So what we can do is take a look at this and understand that pod 1 WLC is a lot more chatty than the other ones, but otherwise everything looks pretty good here. So this concludes the webhook telemetry section. Please check the deployment guide for additional information on configuring this feature. Thank you.